Hey guys, this is Merlini bringing you another episode of my Mailbag, episode number 26. The topic of this one is the revival of Pugna and some older heroes in general. This week's question was submitted to me by Sebastian. Hi Merlini, I love playing Pugna, but it was a forgotten hero on the competitive scene. Since 6.79 I see a lot of ban, and I suppose that is because he come to live in pro plays. Why is that? He got a few changes in the patch, but no one in the part of the hero that all the people was complaining about. He is a paper hero. I'd like you to explain that and recommend some games to see with Pugna in it. Thank you, and sorry for the English. I'm not my natural language. Thank you, Sebastian, for the question. So this question is pretty much, why is Pugna back in competitive? The title of his email is actually Pugna's Revival. So, just drawing some data from www.dota.com, 6.79 hero stats. Looking at Pugna right here, 59 games, so he's like probably around 20th most picked. And he has a very impressive win rate, 59%. If you look at this list of all the popular heroes, the only one that has more is Bounty Hunter at a whopping 68%. Probably because Alliance picks him a lot, but still 68% is ridiculous. No other one is even close to 60 aside from Pugna, and which is very high. It's not that high of a sample size, but it's still pretty impressive. KDA, nothing too impressive there. None of the other stats really are worth mentioning, but his win rate is pretty high, so people have been using him a lot in the Eastern and Western scene both. So what are the recent Pugna related changes? So the first 7 lines are from Pugna directly from the 6.79 changelog. Actually, first 4 are: Decrepify, damage amplify on allies reduced from 40% to 25%, so it's better to use defensively. Now you won't get punished as hard. And Decrepify damage amplification on enemies increased from 40% to 50%, so it's more potent as a nuke now, or assistance in nuke. Nether War now requires 3 hits to kill instead of 75/150/225/300 HP. Heroes hurt it for 1, others for 0.25. This is a really big buff because in the early game people can't really touch it anyways because they don't have BKBs, and later in the game, like a Lone Druid, Syllabear, or a like Visage Familiars, even any summons can just wreck it in a couple hits, or a BKB hero, and you kind of just like have to use your Decrep instantly on it or else it'll die. But 3 hits all game, that's pretty respectable. Life Drain restores mana if it tries to heal you while you are full HP when targeting heroes, which is also pretty useful too, but not often are you full HP. He tends to take a lot of damage because of his low armor. And these 3 are actually pretty important too. It wasn't that big when I thought about it at the time, but in retrospect they're pretty important. Melee Barracks HP regen increased from 2.5 to 5. Range Barracks HP regen decreased from 2.5 to 0. And Range Barracks HP reduced from 1500 to 1200, and armor increased from 5 to 10. Same EHP versus physical damage, but EHP versus magical damage is a lot less, 20% less. So this is a really big deal because you'll see some really good teams, namely Alliance, actually almost exclusively focus range racks every time they push. They do that all the time because it has no more regen anymore. And aside from tree, heal, there's nothing you can do to prevent damage from your to your range rack, I guess, barring global GA from Omni Knight, which I still haven't seen in competitive, or using Glyph of Fortification. So that means that spell sieging is a lot more useful against the range racks in general, and it's just more potent considering one of the previous changes in the 6.78. Nether Blast structure damage increased from 33 to 50%, which is a very significant increase. You might be like, oh, well, it's only 17% of his Nether Blast damage, but that's a 50% increase from what it was before. It is like, what, 325, a third of that is 110-ish, so it does like 110 to 165. That's really big. This is really irrelevant, and pretty much in all these, every single version, 6.74, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, he's gotten buffs. So buff, 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 buff. Iceborne clearly thinks he's a little bit underpowered and would like to see him more in competitive. And eventually it will get to the point where people just like have to start using him. But mostly I think it's because of strategy and playstyle shifts. Firstly, there's more action and pushing. I was looking at one of the Navi versus mouse games, one game that I actually casted in D2O. It was like 37 kills in 18 minutes, and the game ended in 18 minutes. They actually got a Rex, I think, at like 12 or 13, which is really, really fast. That's something that you don't see very often, aside from some really niche push strategies. With I saw like Flipside run one with like Dazzle, Omni Knight, and a couple other weird heroes. But aside from that, they had like normal heroes. They had like Enigma and Pugna, etc. So it wasn't like a niche push strat. But they ended the game very, very quickly. So it's more focused on early game now. Also, with the jungle being nerfed, supports are pulling a lot less. So there's generally just a lot more action going around the map. People killing, people fighting. Pugna's a very good early fighter. His nuke does a little bit more damage than other nukes. It's a very low cooldown. It's a pretty large AoE. And his Nether Ward just absolutely destroys people early game. The prevalence of 2-1-2 laning, a lot of teams have shifted to 2-1-2 style, which means less dual support rotation. And previously in 6.78, it was, oh, okay, it's about that time of the game. The triple lane will just smoke with the 2 supports and kill the mid. And if you don't, if you're not Quap, if you're not Magnus, if you're not Puck, you're most likely going to die. And even if you are those heroes, you might still die. And that makes heroes that have less of an escape in mid, like Pugna, like Shadow Fiend, more potent because they're less likely to die, and they can get the experience and the levels and the farm that they need in the middle lane. Also, the rise of heavy casters like Earthshaker, Lion, Shadow Shaman, etc. makes his Pugna Ward just incredibly strong, especially an Earthshaker who gets behind. His mana is going to be drained before he can even cast all 3 of his spells. Lion, he barely has enough mana to cast all 3 of his spells to begin with, minus mana drain. And if he casts it, he's pretty much just going to do as much damage to himself. Shadow Shaman, also, when he dumps his mana pool, it's pretty much 1 round of his spells dumps his mana pool, and you'll take almost more damage casting it than actually the damage that you do with your spells. And yeah, DK may be the only team that really uses Lion and Shadow Shaman, but Earthshaker has been really, really popular, and these are only some of the heavy casters that have come to rise in popularity. And we're seeing this trend in general just for Dota patches, Dota 2 patches. Small buffs bring heroes out of obscurity, such as Mirana, Death Prophet, Earthshaker, or Luna. The buffs that they receive are very, very minor. Mirana cooldown from like 140, 120 to 110 on her ultimate. Death Prophet, maybe like a 15% increase in her spirit damage going from 23 to 27, which is very small, but she has been picked a lot more. Earthshaker got like very small buffs, and Luna got very small buffs too, but it's mostly just playstyle shifts and people willing to experiment with heroes and be like, oh wow, this hero is actually good for this situation, or it works really well in tandem with like Mirana works really well in tandem with Naga Siren, who's a really strong pick. So people are just discovering things more just because there's more experimentation, because people are like, oh wow, 6.79 really changed a lot, we should change things a lot too so we can adapt to the playstyle. And the teams that adapt the fastest are usually the most successful. But it's not necessarily the buffs, it's more, I think, strategy and playstyle shifts over the 6.79 changes in particular. Although if you consider like the 6.70 all the way to 6.79, those are definitely more significant than the 6.79 strategy and playstyle shifts. But still, very interesting stuff going on. And this doesn't only apply to Pugna too. We've just seen like a lot of strategies come back. I remember when I was on a team with Milk, we ran a Earthshaker Luna Juggernaut strategy, and he called it the bringing sexy back strategy, because those heroes were once in their heyday and then they kind of fell off, and then we try to bring them back again. It's similar. We see Earthshaker Luna, we see Sand King fairly often too, and these heroes were popular back in the day for those of you that didn't play that much Dota back in Dota 1 or even in the early days of Dota 2. The game was a lot different and is a lot different than now. So old strategies still work now and then. People are having a lot of success with those. So as I'm casting more and more D2L, I'm getting a better sense of what these teams do and what the general strategy is. So that concludes this Merlini's mailbag. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you like my videos, you can subscribe to me at www.youtube.com/MerliniDota. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook for updates. And as usual, if you'd like your question answered on a weekly 10 to 15 minute episode, then please email me at mailbag@merlinidota.com. Thanks guys for watching.